Welcome back, guys, to Mr. Cursed. In today's episode, I'm sharing 9 very scary, true stories from deep down in the Appalachian Mountains. These are real horror stories that happen to real people in places where almost nobody goes. But before we start, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends and family. I'd also love to hear where you're watching from. Thank you all for your support. It means a lot to me. Now, let's get started. I was 26 when I decided to start my own pest control business. Nothing fancy, just me, my truck, and whatever bug problems people needed fixed around the Blue Ridge area. My girlfriend Sarah was pregnant with our first kid, and honestly, the money from my old warehouse job just wasn't cutting it anymore. I figured exterminating was steady work. Bugs don't take vacations, you know? The call came in on a Tuesday morning in October. Guy named Garrett said he had something laying eggs in the walls of his cabin up near Hollow Creek Gorge. Said he'd tried 3 different exterminators already, but they all quit without finishing the job. That should have been my first red flag, but he was offering double my usual rate, and I was behind on my truck payments. Sarah needed new maternity clothes, and we still hadn't bought a crib yet. I told him I'd be there Wednesday morning. The drive up to Hollow Creek took about an hour from my place in Burnsville. The cabin was way back in the woods, down this winding dirt road that my GPS kept losing track of. When I finally found it, I could see why the other guys might have gotten spooked. The place sat right on the edge of this massive gorge, had to be 60 feet deep with these weird holes all along the rock walls. Looked like giant insect burrows, if you can picture that. The whole setup felt wrong, but I needed the money. Mr. Garrett met me outside. Older guy, maybe in his 60s, real nervous energy about him. He kept glancing at the tree line like he expected something to come walking out. First thing he told me was that he never stayed on the property after dark. Said his grandfather built the cabin back in the 1940s, but the family stopped using it regularly after some troubles in the area. He wouldn't elaborate on what kind of troubles. I spent the first couple hours doing my standard inspection. No droppings anywhere, no visible damage to the wood, no obvious entry points where bugs might be getting in. But the walls definitely had something moving inside them. You could hear it if you put your ear close. Thousands of tiny claws scratching and tapping. It was rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. I'd never heard anything quite like it in 5 years of pest work. Around 3 in the afternoon, the air started getting thick. You know how it feels right before a big storm? Except the sky was clear. There was this sweet smell too, like honey that had gone bad. Made my stomach turn. I noticed something else weird. All the normal bug sounds had stopped. No flies buzzing around, no mosquitoes, no beetles in the dead leaves. For a place in the mountains during October, that was pretty unusual. My electronic bug detector started going absolutely crazy. This thing was supposed to pick up insect movement and activity levels, but it was reading massive numbers in rooms that were completely empty. I'd never seen readings that high, not even in houses with serious termite problems. I was starting to think maybe my equipment was broken. That's when I noticed the cairns. These little stone piles had appeared around the cabin foundation while I was working inside. Hadn't been there when I arrived, I'm sure of that. Each one was maybe 2 feet tall, and they all had these white spheres sitting on top. Looked like eggs, but way too big to be from any bug I knew about. When I touched one, it was warm. Warm and sort of pulsing, like there was something alive inside. The chemical smell hit me next, sharp, like ammonia mixed with something wet and organic, made my eyes water. I was thinking maybe there was a septic problem, but the smell was coming from the direction of the gorge, not the cabin's plumbing. I walked over to get a better look at those holes in the rock walls. That's when I saw the red cloth streak. Yes. Someone had tied pieces of red fabric to the edges of the burrows, dozens of them, fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. They definitely hadn't been there when I first arrived. The scratching sounds from inside the cabin walls were getting louder too, more synchronized. It really did sound like a giant heartbeat now. Look, I'm not the type to scare easy, but something was seriously wrong with this place. I decided to cut open a section of the wall to see what was actually in there. Maybe it was carpenter ants or some kind of beetle colony. I figured if I could identify the problem, I could fix it and get out of there. The wall was hollow inside, which wasn't that unusual for an old cabin. What made my skin crawl was the lining. The inner surface was covered in this wet, flesh-like substance. It was pink and soft, almost like the inside of someone's mouth. And embedded in it were hundreds of white eggs, each about the size of a chicken egg, arranged in perfect rows. When my flashlight hit them, they started hatching. The larvae that came out weren't like anything I'd ever seen in pest control training. They were pale, almost translucent, and they moved like maggots. But they had tiny arms and legs, and their faces? God, their faces looked almost human, like little babies, but wrong. They made these soft crying sounds as they wiggled around in the fleshy stuff inside the wall. I dropped my tools and backed away from the opening. This wasn't an insect problem. This was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist. That's when I heard Sarah's voice calling from the gorge. "Travis?" she said, and it sounded exactly like her. "Travis, help me." I knew it couldn't be Sarah. She was back home in Burnsville, probably watching TV and eating those pickles she'd been craving. But the voice was perfect. Same tone, same little accent she had from growing up in Tennessee. I found myself walking toward the gorge before I could stop myself. The voice was coming from one of the larger burrows, maybe 20 feet down the rock wall. I could see something moving in the shadows. As I got closer, I made out a figure tied up with what looked like spider silk or cocoon material. It was Sarah, or something that looked exactly like her. Same brown hair, same face, same clothes she'd been wearing when I left that morning. But her belly was huge, way bigger than it should have been at 4 months pregnant. It was moving too, like something was swimming around inside. And when she looked up at me, her eyes were completely black, not just the pupils. The whole eye was black as tar. "I'm so happy," she said in that flat, emotionless voice. "Our babies will be beautiful." That's when I knew it wasn't really Sarah. The real Sarah would have been screaming, crying, asking me to get her out of there. This thing was just wearing her appearance like a mask. Something else emerged from deeper in the burrow. I can barely describe what I saw. It was shaped like a woman, but the proportions were all wrong. Too tall, too thin, with joints in places where joints shouldn't be. Its skin looked like wet plastic, and it moved in this fluid way that made me think of snakes or eels. It had been studying pregnant women, learning how to copy them. The fake Sarah was just one of hundreds. I could see other burrows now, each one containing a copied woman with that same swollen belly and those black eyes, all of them producing these hybrid larvae that would eventually replace real people. The entity looked at me with eyes that were too large and completely white. When it spoke, its voice sounded like Sarah's, but coming from the wrong mouth. "You'll make strong offspring," it said, reaching toward me with fingers that were too long and had too many joints. I felt my skin starting to change where it touched me, getting waxy and translucent like the fake Sarah's. I knew I had maybe seconds before I ended up like all those copied women in the burrows. I still had my chemical sprayer on my belt. It was loaded with concentrated pesticide, the strongest stuff I carried for serious infestations. I pulled it out and sprayed the entity directly in the face. The chemicals burned its skin like acid. It let out this shriek that echoed through the whole gorge, and all the fake pregnant women started dissolving. They weren't real, just projections or illusions the entity had created. As they melted away into pale slime, the larvae in the cabin walls started screaming in tiny human voices. I ran back to the cabin while the entity writhed around in the gorge, clawing at its burned face. The chemical smell was spreading through all the burrows now, and those baby-faced larvae were dying by the hundreds. I grabbed the emergency flare from my truck and set the whole cabin on fire. All those egg-filled walls went up in flames, and the screaming got so loud I thought my eardrums might burst. I drove away as fast as my truck would take me. In the rearview mirror, I could see the entity standing in the gorge, watching me leave. Even with half its face burned off, it was still studying me, learning. When I got home, Sarah was safe on the couch where I'd left her, watching some cooking show and complaining about heartburn. She asked how the job went, and I told her it was just carpenter ants. Nothing serious. I've never told her what really happened up there. I quit pest control the next week. Told Sarah I wanted to try something different, maybe get into landscaping instead. Truth is, I couldn't handle any more jobs involving nesting or reproduction. Even regular ant colonies made me sick to my stomach. The nightmares started about a month later. Pale children with insect movements, calling me daddy in those tiny crying voices. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, checking every corner of our bedroom for white eggs. We moved to Tennessee when Sarah was 7 months pregnant. I told her I wanted to be closer to her family, but really, I just wanted to get as far away from Hollow Creek as possible. I found work at a hardware store. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and didn't involve going into anyone's walls. Our son was born healthy and normal, thank God, but I got a vasectomy when he was 6 months old. Told Sarah I just thought one kid was enough, but the real reason was I was terrified of what any more children might become. What if that thing was still out there, watching our family? What if it had marked us somehow? Sometimes I still find small white eggs in the corners of our house, always in the basement or behind the water heater where Sarah won't see them. I destroy them immediately with bleach and fire, but they keep showing up, usually right after I've been thinking about that day at Hollow Creek. I check every room for egg-filled walls before I can sleep at night. It's been 3 years now, and I still can't break the habit. Sarah thinks I'm just being paranoid about home maintenance, but I know the truth. That breeding entity is still out there, still learning, still looking for us, and I have a feeling it's not done with our family yet. I was 24 when I was doing my final semester of nursing school at Mercy General, this little clinic near a place called Meat Hook Gorge. Honestly, I thought the name was just some old mountain thing, like how they name places after whatever happened there 100 years ago. The clinic served all these remote mountain communities, and we saw a lot of hunting accidents, farming injuries, that kind of stuff. Pretty typical for rural medicine, or so I thought. My supervisor was Dr. Hayes, this older guy who'd been working mountain medicine for like 20 years. Really knew his stuff, but he was kind of nervous around certain patients. I noticed it my first week there. We'd get someone in with what looked like a clean cut or a precise wound, and Dr. Hayes would get all quiet and tense. He'd patch them up quick and send them on their way without much discussion. When I asked about it, he'd just say something like, "Mountain accidents can be strange," and change the subject. The thing that really got my attention was how many of these clean injuries we were seeing, like way more than you'd expect. Most farming and hunting accidents are messy, right? Jagged cuts from equipment, tears from falls, that kind of thing. But we were getting people with wounds that looked almost surgical, too precise, too neat. And when I checked the files, I started noticing a pattern. A lot of these patients had been found near Meat Hook Gorge. I probably should have left it alone, but nursing school teaches you to look for patterns, to ask questions. So on a Thursday evening in October, I decided to drive out to the gorge and see what was going on. Maybe there was some kind of safety hazard out there, like sharp rock formations or old equipment that was causing these weird injuries. I packed a first aid kit and brought a good flashlight, figured I'd just take a quick look around. The gorge is about 15 miles from the clinic, down this winding mountain road. When you get there, you can see why they call it Meat Hook Gorge. It's this deep cut in the rock, maybe 55 feet down, with all these stone formations that stick out like giant hooks and blades. Really dramatic looking, especially in the evening light. I parked my car at the rim and hiked down this narrow trail, being careful with my footing. About halfway down, I found this cave system I hadn't expected. The entrance was hidden behind some of those hook-shaped rocks, and I probably wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't been looking for anything unusual. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped inside, just curious at first. But what I saw in there made no sense at all. There were stone tables carved right out of the cave floor, not natural formations, but actual tables, like operating tables. They were the right height, the right shape, even had little channels carved around the edges like for drainage. And scattered around them were these old medical instruments. Bone saws, needles, scalpels, but all really primitive looking, like they were 100 years old or more. I'm standing there trying to figure out what I'm looking at when the air starts to change. It's around 9 o'clock now, getting dark outside, but inside the cave it gets really thick and heavy. The smell hits me first. Antiseptic, like you'd smell in a hospital, but mixed with something rotten, something that's been dead for a while. All the normal sounds disappear. You know how caves usually echo? How you can hear water dripping or your own footsteps? Nothing. Just this wet, dripping sound that seems to come from everywhere at once. My pen light starts flickering, which is weird because I'd just put new batteries in it. I check my phone for signal, and there's nothing. Not even one bar. Then I see the cairns. Stone cairns. These little stacks of rocks appearing around the cave entrance. I swear they weren't there when I came in, and on top of each one is a human organ. Hearts, livers, kidneys, all fresh and wet, like they'd just been removed. They're arranged really carefully, like medical specimens in a lab. The smell of formaldehyde mixes with the blood smell, and I start feeling sick. Red cloth strips begin appearing, connecting the stone tables like medical tubing. They're moving by themselves, threading between the instruments and wrapping around the organ displays. The whole cave is starting to look like some kind of operating theater, but wrong, ancient and wrong. That's when I hear the surgery sounds. Cutting, sawing, wet sucking noises like tissue being separated from bone. It's coming from deeper in the cave system, echoing off the walls. I know I should run, but I'm frozen. This is medical stuff, and I'm a nursing student. Some part of me needs to understand what's happening. A figure emerges from the darkness at the back of the cave. It's wearing a surgical gown, but the fabric is stained dark with old blood. The thing that used to be its face is partially dissected, skin peeled back to show muscle and bone underneath, like someone was demonstrating anatomy but never finished. It moves with this precise clinical motion, carrying antique surgical tools in hands that are too pale and too thin. "Patient needs surgery," it says in this flat professional voice. "Emergency procedure required." More figures come out behind it. Surgical spirits, I guess you'd call them. Nurses with exposed skulls where their caps should be. Doctors with missing limbs, carrying bone saws and rusted scalpels. They all move with the same medical precision, like they're still performing operations. They look at me with cold, professional interest. "Healthy specimen," one of them murmurs. "Excellent organ quality. Young tissue." They start preparing their instruments, discussing which organs to harvest first like they're planning a routine surgery. These things have been performing experios, mental operations on anyone who enters the gorge. I realize these are medical practitioners who became obsessed with cutting, with surgery. They died performing increasingly extreme procedures on themselves and others, and now they're trapped here, still trying to operate. More spirits block the cave entrance as I back toward it. They move me toward one of the stone operating tables with hands that feel like ice water. The lead surgeon raises a bone saw, examining my neck with the focus of a real doctor. "Clean incision," it says. "Minimal tissue damage. Preserve neurological function." I'm terrified, but I'm also a nursing student, and these things are doing everything wrong. "You're not maintaining sterile field," I say, my voice shaking. "No anesthesia. The patient will die from shock before you can complete the procedure." The surgical spirits stop moving. They look confused, like I've pointed out something important they hadn't considered. Their obsession with precision conflicts with the criticism. "Your technique is completely flawed," I continue, getting desperate. "No preoperative preparation, no vital sign monitoring. You're just butchers, not surgeons." They start arguing among themselves about proper surgical procedures. The lead surgeon insists their methods are correct, but the others are questioning techniques they've been using for decades. During their confusion, I grab a sharp piece of stone and cut through the red cloth strips that are connecting everything. The cave system loses its organization immediately. The surgical setup becomes chaotic and unstable. Instruments scatter, the organ displays topple over, and the spirits begin panicking, trying to re-establish their operating theater. While they're distracted, I run for the entrance and climb out of the gorge as fast as I can. I drove straight back to town, but I didn't tell anyone what really happened. I reported finding an unstable cave system to the park authorities, said it was a geological hazard. They closed off the area within a week. No more victims. I finished nursing. school that semester, but I couldn't handle surgery rotations. Every time I saw an operating room or surgical instruments, I'd have panic attacks. I specialized in psychiatric care instead, working with patients who have trauma responses. It felt like something I could actually help with after what I'd experienced. I moved to a city hospital after graduation, never took assignments in rural areas again. I became an advocate for patient rights and informed consent in medical procedures, which probably sounds weird, but it matters to me now. I teach nursing students that medical knowledge without humanity becomes something monstrous. Looking back, I think those spirits were doctors and nurses from way back, maybe from when the area was first settled. They became so obsessed with surgery, with cutting and examining, that they lost sight of healing. They just kept operating, even after death. I still dream about it sometimes, being conscious and aware while being dissected. I wake up feeling like someone's examining me, studying my organs. To this day, I can't use sharp medical instruments without thinking about those surgical spirits and their perfect, terrible precision. I never went back to Meat Hook Gorge. I never will. I was 25 when I inherited my dad's BBQ food truck, and honestly, I had no idea what I was doing. My name's Marcus Washington, and before Dad passed, I was working construction in Richmond. Never thought I'd be running a business, especially not one that was already 3 months behind on loan payments. The bank kept calling, threatening to take the truck, and I was pretty much out of options. That's when I got this weird call about a catering job in some place called Bone Valley Gorge, way out in rural Virginia. The pay was $2,000 cash for 1 weekend, enough to save the whole business. The guy on the phone sounded older, maybe in his 60s, and he said he represented some kind of historical society. They wanted me to cater their annual meeting, food for about 50 people. Nothing fancy, just good BBQ. He gave me these strange directions. Follow Highway 220 south until you see the old mining road, take that until it dead ends, then hike down into the gorge with all my supplies. I thought it was weird, but $2,000 is $2,000, and I was desperate. I loaded up the truck Friday morning with everything I'd need: folding tables, my portable grill setup, propane tanks, coolers full of meat, all the sides. Dad had taught me his recipes before he died, and I was getting pretty good at the whole thing, even if the business side was killing me. The drive took about 3 hours, getting more rural the further I went. Eventually, I found that mining road, just 2 tire tracks really, cutting through thick woods. The road ended at what looked like an old parking area, just dirt and gravel with some rusted mining equipment scattered around. I could see where the gorge started, this narrow cut in the earth that dropped down, maybe 100 feet. There was a hiking trail that switchbacked down the steep walls, carved right into the limestone. I started carrying my stuff down, making trip after trip. The gorge was narrow, maybe 50 yards across, with walls of solid rock on both sides. At the bottom was this natural clearing with a creek running through it. Pretty spot, actually, if you didn't mind feeling like you were at the bottom of a well. By the time I got everything set up, it was getting dark. I had my folding tables arranged, the grill ready to go, coolers full of food. The client said the Historical Society members would start arriving Saturday morning, so I figured I'd sleep in the truck's little camping area and get an early start cooking. I made myself a sandwich and tried to relax, but something felt off. The air down there was thick, almost hard to breathe, and it was way too quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. I woke up Saturday morning feeling sick as a dog. My head was pounding and I could barely keep anything down. The air had gotten worse overnight, thick and poisonous feeling, like breathing through wet cloth. I tried turning on my portable radio to check the weather, but all I got was static. My phone was completely dead too, which was weird because it had been working fine the day before. That's when I noticed the cairns. Someone had built these little towers of stones all around my cooking area, maybe a dozen of them, each one topped with bones. Old bones, bleached white by the sun. Ribs, finger bones, pieces of skull. I'm no expert, but they looked human to me. My stomach dropped, and I started thinking maybe this wasn't actually a historical society meeting after all. The smell hit next, like spoiled meat mixed with chemicals, so strong it made my eyes water. I tried lighting my propane grill to start cooking. Figured if people were coming, I better be ready. but the flame kept dying out. Just wouldn't stay lit no matter what I did. That's when I saw the red cloth strips tied around rocks in a perfect circle around my setup. They hadn't been there the night before. I was sure of it. I heard voices then, echoing off the gorge walls. "Feed us," they said. "We're so hungry." The voices sounded desperate, like people who hadn't eaten in weeks, but there was no one around that I could see. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but just got my own voice echoing back. Looking around my equipment, I found handprints in the sand, but they weren't right. Too wide, with too many joints in the fingers, covered in some kind of dark, sticky stuff. I knelt down to get a better look and nearly threw up. Whatever made those prints, it wasn't human. That's when they started coming out of the walls. I know how that sounds, but I swear that's what happened. These pale figures just emerged from cracks in the limestone, like the rock was opening up to let them through. They looked like people, sort of, but stretched and wrong. Their skin hung loose like empty clothes, and their faces were all sunken in. Eyes completely black, mouths too wide with way too many teeth. They were wearing clothes from different time periods, some in old-fashioned dresses from maybe the 1800s, others in work clothes that could have been from the 1920s or 1950s. It hit me then. These were people who had died of starvation in this gorge, maybe over decades or centuries. And somehow they'd become something else, something that fed on life instead of food. They surrounded my cooking area, pointing at me with those wrong-shaped hands and making hungry sounds. Not like stomach growling, but like animals that hadn't eaten in years. I could feel something pulling at me, like they were draining my energy just by being near. My legs went weak and I had to grab the table to stay upright. I started cooking frantically, throwing meat on the grill, hoping real food might satisfy them. But when I offered them BBQ, it just fell through their fingers like they weren't solid. They could only feed on living energy, not actual food. They kept reaching toward me, and every time they got closer, I yelled weaker. I remembered something Dad used to say, always feed people with love, not just food. So I started talking to them about him, sharing memories instead of trying to give them meat. I told them about how Dad taught me to cook, about his recipes, about his dreams for the business. The hungry spirits stopped moving, drawn to the emotional energy of real human connection. As I talked, they started looking more human. Their faces filled out a little, their eyes got some color back. But I realized I was giving them pieces of myself, pieces of my memories and life force. If I kept going, there wouldn't be anything left of me. I grabbed Dad's old meat cleaver from my knife roll and cut the propane line. The gas hissed out, and I threw my lighter at it. The explosion wasn't huge, but it was enough to scatter the spirits temporarily. I grabbed my backpack and Dad's old rock climbing gear that I'd brought just in case, and started climbing. Dad had taught me to climb when I was a kid, and those lessons saved my life. The spirits couldn't follow me above the gorge. They were bound to the place where they'd starved to death. I could hear them wailing as I climbed, but their voices got fainter the higher I went. I drove straight home and never went back. Lost all my equipment, but I was alive. I used the experience to change how I ran the business. Instead of just serving food, I started doing cooking classes about family traditions, teaching people Dad's recipes along with the stories behind them. The food truck became successful by selling emotional connections, not just BBQ. Sometimes when I'm cooking, I feel Dad's presence helping me, but it's warm and loving, nothing like those hungry things in the gorge. I still don't know who called me about that job or if there ever was a historical society meeting. I just know that some hungers can never be satisfied, no matter how much you try to feed them. I never talk about this much, but every now and then I see something online about Bone Valley Gorge. Apparently people have been going missing there for over a century. Hikers, campers, people like me who thought they were just doing a job. The authorities always assume they fell or got lost, but I know better. There's something down there that's always hungry, and it's been feeding for a very long time. I was 23 when I dropped out of engineering school after what my mom still calls my little breakdown. Honestly, it wasn't that little, but whatever. Point is, I needed to pay off student loans fast, and my uncle's buddy Tony ran a small welding shop outside Charleston. He said he'd teach me the trade if I was willing to work hard and do the jobs nobody else wanted. I figured hot, dirty work beat sitting in a cubicle somewhere, so I said yes. The money was decent, and I actually liked welding once I got the hang of it. There's something satisfying about joining two pieces of metal together, making something stronger than it was before. Tony mostly had me working on farm equipment and the occasional fence repair, nothing too exciting. But after about 6 months, he came to me with what he called a special project. "There's this old bridge up in Iron Creek Gorge, West Virginia," he said, pulling out some faded blueprints. "Built back in the 40s, and the state's finally getting around to reinforcing it. They need someone to cut out the rusted sections and weld in new support beams." The pay was double overtime because the location was remote and dangerous. The bridge crossed a 60-foot gorge, and I'd be working alone for a week straight. Tony said the isolation was why they couldn't keep anyone on the job. The last 2 guys quit after a day each. But I needed the money, and honestly, being alone in the mountains sounded better than dealing with people. I loaded up my truck that Monday morning with everything I'd need: welding equipment, cutting torch, safety gear, a week's worth of food, and camping supplies. The drive took about 4 hours through increasingly narrow mountain roads. Iron Creek Gorge wasn't even on my GPS. I had to follow Tony's hand-drawn directions on a piece of notebook paper. The bridge was exactly what you'd expect from something built in the 1940s. Rusted steel beams, cables that looked like they were held together by prayers, and the kind of industrial design that prioritized function over everything else. But it was solid underneath all that rust. The bones were good, just needed some help staying that way. I set up my equipment on the bridge deck and got to work. The first day went normally. Hot, difficult, but nothing I hadn't handled before. The cutting torch sliced through the corroded sections like butter, and the new steel pieces fit perfectly. By evening, I'd made good progress and felt pretty confident about finishing on schedule. Tuesday morning, something felt different. The air had gotten thick overnight, almost metallic tasting when I breathed. I figured it was just the humidity. Mountain weather can be weird like that, but when I fired up my welding torch, the flame burned bright blue instead of the usual orange. I adjusted the gas mixture 3 times, but it kept burning that strange blue color. That's when I noticed the silence. Complete, absolute silence. No birds singing, no water flowing in the creek below, not even the sound of wind through the trees. I've spent plenty of time in the mountains, and it's never that quiet. There's always something making noise. Insects, at least. But this was like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. My angle grinder stopped working around noon, even though the battery showed full charge. I tried 3 different batteries, all fully charged, but the tool wouldn't even turn on. That's when I started paying attention to other things that seemed off. Stone cairns had appeared along both sides of the bridge, not regular stone cairns. These were made from scrap metal pieces, twisted into uneven pyramids about 3 feet high. Each one had welding equipment sitting on top. Old torches, coils of wire, chunks of steel. The equipment looked ancient, like it had been sitting there for decades. But I swear those cairns hadn't been there the day before. The smell hit me around 2 in the afternoon. Burning metal mixed with something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in the sun. It got stronger as the day went on, until I had to breathe through my shirt to keep from gagging. Red cloth strips started appearing tied to the bridge cables. Not bright red, faded, like they'd been weathered for years. They fluttered in wind I couldn't feel, making soft rustling sounds that seemed too loud in the unnatural silence. That's when I heard the welding. Multiple torches firing at once, sparks flying, the distinctive sound of metal being cut and joined. But I was alone on that bridge. I'd been alone all week. The sounds were coming from underneath, down in the gorge where nobody could possibly be working. I looked over the edge and saw sparks flying in the darkness below. Pale figures were welding in midair, hanging from the bridge superstructure like they weighed nothing at all. They wore old welding gear, the heavy leather aprons and masks from decades ago, but their skin showed through holes in the clothes. Their skin was gray and metallic, gleaming like polished steel in the torchlight. But it wasn't skin, not really. It was actual metal, grown over human bones like some kind of industrial infection. Their welding masks weren't just worn. They were fused to their faces, become part of their skulls. I realized these were the workers who died building the original bridge. Construction accidents were common back then. Safety regulations were basically non-existent. They'd fallen into the gorge during construction, but somehow kept working, become part of the structure they'd died building. The metal spirits were trying to maintain the bridge, keep it standing through sheer will and endless labor. But they were also trying to add me to their eternal construction crew. One figure climbed up onto the bridge deck, moving with mechanical precision. Its welding torch wasn't held in its hand. It was growing from its arm, fed by veins instead of gas lines. When it spoke, its voice sounded like grinding metal. "Join us," it said. "Help us build forever." More metal spirits climbed onto the bridge from both sides. They moved wrong, like machines pretending to be human. Their joints bent at angles that hurt to look at, and when they walked, they left scorch marks on the steel deck. They started welding my equipment to the bridge, trapping my tools with quick, precise welds. Then they began welding around my feet, trying to make me part of the structure. The heat was incredible, but somehow it didn't burn. It felt like it was changing me instead, turning my flesh into something harder and more useful. I tried to fight back with my cutting torch, but they absorbed the flame into their bodies like they were feeding on it. The fire disappeared into their metal skin and made them stronger, brighter. That's when my engineering training kicked in. I couldn't fight them directly, but I understood the bridge's structural weaknesses better than they did. I'd spent all week analyzing its load-bearing points, mapping out exactly where the stress concentrated. I still had the thermite charges I'd brought for cutting through the thickest support beams. If I could weaken the right points simultaneously, the whole structure would collapse. The metal spirits were part of the bridge now. If it fell, they'd fall with it. I worked fast, placing charges at the critical stress points while the spirits were focused on welding. They didn't understand what I was doing until it was too late. When the charges went off, the bridge started coming apart in exactly the way I'd calculated. The metal spirits screamed as their bridge collapsed, but they were trapped in the falling steel, bound to the structure they'd died protecting. I was already rappelling down my safety line, swinging tops. The gorge wall as the entire bridge crashed into the creek below. I climbed out using rock climbing skills I'd learned in college, back when I thought I'd become a structural engineer instead of a welder. The irony wasn't lost on me, even in that moment. When I reached the top, the unnatural silence was broken. Birds were singing again, water was flowing, and my truck started on the first try. I drove straight back to Charleston without stopping, leaving all my welding equipment in the wreckage below. I reported the bridge collapse as a structural failure caused by metal fatigue. The investigation found exactly what I said they'd find. Decades of corrosion had weakened critical support points. No one mentioned the metal spirits because no one else had seen them. I quit welding the next week and went back to engineering school. The experience had given me something I'd been missing before: a real understanding of why structural safety matters. It's not just about building things that work. It's about building things that protect the people who use them. I specialized in bridge engineering and became obsessed with construction safety. Every project I work on now includes extra safety measures, redundant support systems, things that probably aren't necessary but make me sleep better at night. Sometimes I dream about welding in midair, hanging from steel beams high above dark water. But I always wake up human, and I've made sure that bridge accidents like the ones at Iron Creek don't happen anymore. I never work alone on remote construction projects. I always bring a full crew, even when it's more expensive. And I never, ever cross a bridge without thinking about the people who built it and what they gave up to make it stand. Looking back now, I think the metal spirits weren't evil exactly. They were just trying to do their job, the only way they knew how. But some jobs aren't worth becoming a ghost for, and I'm glad I figured that out before it was too late. I was 22 when I finally decided I had to do something about my stage fright, or I was going to give up music completely. I'd been writing songs since I was probably 15, decent stuff too, but I couldn't perform them in front of anyone without having a complete panic attack. My hands would shake so bad I couldn't hold a pick. My voice would crack, and I'd just freeze up. It was getting ridiculous, honestly. So I started seeing this therapist, Dr. Martinez, and she suggested I practice performing in isolated places first. Build up my confidence gradually, you know? Start with just me and the trees, then maybe work up to small groups later. Made sense, I guess. My buddy Jake heard about this plan and told me about Lost Voice Gorge up in Tennessee. Said it was this natural amphitheater with perfect acoustics, completely private, and nobody ever went there. Sounded exactly like what I needed. I packed up my truck with my guitar, some basic recording equipment, and enough supplies for 3 days. The drive took about 4 hours from my place in North Carolina. Jake had given me pretty good directions, but the last part was just a dirt road that seemed to go on forever. When I finally found the trailhead, there wasn't even a proper sign, just this weathered piece of wood with LVG carved into it. The hike down to the gorge wasn't too bad, maybe 20 minutes through some thick woods, but when I came out of the trees and saw the place, I stopped dead in my tracks. Jake wasn't kidding about it being a natural amphitheater. The whole thing was like a giant bowl carved right into the mountainside, about 45 feet deep with these smooth, curved walls that looked almost too perfect to be natural. At the bottom was this flat area with a big rock in the center that looked exactly like a stage. I climbed down carefully, testing each foothold. The acoustics hit me right away. Even just my footsteps echoed clearly off the walls, creating this rich, full sound. When I got to the bottom and called out hello, it came back to me like I was in some fancy concert hall. I'd never heard anything like it. I set up my gear on the flat rock in the center and tuned my guitar. The first chord I played literally gave me chills. The sound was incredible, like someone had taken my cheap acoustic and run it through a professional sound system. Every note was crystal clear, every string vibration perfectly balanced. I played through a few of my songs, and honestly, I sounded better than I ever had in my life. That first day was amazing. I recorded probably 6 songs, and when I played them back, they sounded almost professional. The natural reverb filled in all the gaps in my playing, made my voice sound richer and more confident. For the first time ever, I actually liked listening to my own music. I was already planning to extend my trip, maybe stay a whole week. That evening, while I was eating dinner and reviewing my recordings, I started hearing other music echoing from the walls. Beautiful harmonies, instruments I definitely hadn't brought with me. At first I thought maybe my equipment was picking up radio signals or something, but when I checked, everything was off. The music kept going though, these gorgeous arrangements that seemed to complement the songs I'd been playing. I figured it was just some weird acoustic effect, maybe my recordings bouncing back in ways I didn't understand. The sound was so rich and layered, it made my music feel complete in a way it never had before. I fell asleep that night listening to phantom melodies echoing softly around the gorge. The second day started normal enough. I played through my entire catalog, recording new versions of songs I'd been working on for years. But as the day went on, the air started feeling thicker, hard, air to breathe, like the humidity was cranking up even though it wasn't particularly hot. And I noticed something else. All the normal forest sounds had disappeared. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees above. Just my music and those mysterious harmonies that seemed to get stronger every hour. When I checked my recordings from that day, they had sounds on them I definitely didn't make. Extra guitar parts, harmonized vocals, even what sounded like a full rhythm section backing me up. The weird thing was, it all fit perfectly with my songs, like whoever was playing knew exactly what I was trying to achieve musically. That's when I started noticing the stone cairns, little stacks of rocks arranged in a circle around my makeshift stage, maybe 8 or 10 of them. Each one had something on top. Old sheet music, pieces of broken instruments, yellowed concert programs from bands I'd never heard of. The paper looked ancient, like it had been there for decades, but I swear those cairns hadn't been there the day before. There was this smell too, kind of chemical and organic at the same time, like old vinyl records mixed with something rotting. It got stronger near the cairns, but when I moved toward the walls of the gorge, it faded. I told myself it was probably just some weird geological thing, maybe minerals in the rock. By late afternoon, red cloth strips had appeared tied to rocks around the gorge. They fluttered in perfect rhythm with whatever music was playing, even when there wasn't any wind. The whole scene was starting to feel less like a natural acoustic phenomenon and more like some kind of shrine or memorial site. That's when the invisible musicians really started showing off. They were playing increasingly complex arrangements of my songs, adding harmonies I never would have thought of, instrument parts that made my simple acoustic numbers sound like full band productions. It was everything I'd ever wanted my music to sound like, but I wasn't the one creating it. The voices started that evening, soft at first, just my name echoing from different abyss at points around the gorge. Danny, Danny, but always in perfect harmony, like a choir calling to me. Then other phrases. Join us. Play forever. Never be alone again. The voices were beautiful, absolutely beautiful, but they made my skin crawl at the same time. That's when I saw them for the first time. Pale figures emerging from the curved walls like they were stepping out of the rock itself. Translucent but somehow solid-looking, all carrying instruments. There was a woman with a violin from what looked like the 1920s, a man with a banjo who could have been from the 1960s folk scene, and a girl about my age with a modern electric guitar that somehow worked without being plugged into anything. They looked peaceful, happy even, like they'd found exactly what they'd been searching for their whole lives. The perfect audience, the perfect acoustic space, the perfect musical community, and they wanted me to join them. They kept playing my songs, making them sound better than I ever could on my own, looking at me with these expectant, hopeful expressions. I'll be honest, part of me was tempted. This was the first time my music had ever felt truly appreciated, truly understood. These spirits, or whatever they were, they got it. They weren't judging my technique or comparing me to other musicians. They just wanted to play, to create something beautiful together for eternity. But as I listened to them perform my songs, I realized something that made my blood run cold. They were making my music perfect, technically flawless, but it wasn't really my music anymore. All the little imperfections, the slight timing issues, the places where my voice cracked with emotion, all of that was gone. And that stuff, those flaws, that's what made it human. That's what made it mine. I stopped playing and set my guitar down. The moment I did, the spell seemed to break. The spirit must. Icions became agitated, their beautiful harmonies turning discordant and angry. I could feel their frustration, their desperate need for a living musician to anchor their eternal concert. Without someone alive to feed off of, they were just echoes, just memories of music that used to be. So I started singing a cappella, just my voice, raw and imperfect and anxious as hell. One of my simplest songs, but I sang it exactly how I felt it, with all my nervousness and self-doubt and hope mixed together. The spirits tried to harmonize with me, but they couldn't. They could only work with technical music, with notes and rhythms and proper chord progressions. They couldn't handle pure human emotion. My flawed, genuine voice seemed to disrupt their supernatural perfection. They flickered and wavered, their forms becoming less solid. I used that confusion to quickly pack my gear, singing the whole time to keep them at bay. My heart was pounding, my hands were shaking, but I kept singing. I climbed out of that gorge still singing at the top of my lungs, my voice cracking and breaking on every high note. The spirits couldn't follow me beyond their perfect acoustic space. They were trapped there, in their eternal concert hall, waiting for the next living musician to complete their ghostly band. I drove away singing every song I knew, good or bad, perfect or terrible. For the first time in my life, I appreciated how human my voice sounded, how real my mistakes were. When I got home, I realized something had changed. My stage fright wasn't gone, but I understood it differently now. That nervous energy, that imperfection, that was what made my music connect with people. It was what made it alive. I started performing regularly after that, but I kept my anxiety as part of my sound. Audiences could hear the authenticity in my voice, the genuine emotion behind the lyrics. I became somewhat successful, not because I learned to sing perfectly, but because I learned to sing honestly. I never tried to make perfect recordings again. I value emotional truth over technical skill. Now, Sometimes, when I'm performing, I hear phantom harmonies trying to slip in, trying to make my music sound better than it is. But I ignore them. I've learned that music isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. To this day, I teach other anxious musicians the same lesson. Your flaws aren't bugs in your music. They're features. They're what make you human, what make your songs matter. Perfect music might sound nice, but imperfect music, honest music, that's what changes people's lives. I never went back to Lost Voice Gorge, and I never will. But sometimes, late at night when I'm writing new songs, I can swear I hear those spirits still playing, still waiting, still calling for someone to join their perfect, lifeless concert. I just turn up my imperfect, beautiful, very much alive music a little louder and keep on playing. I was 26 when I decided to write my master's thesis on buildings that work with natural landscapes instead of fighting against them. I know that sounds pretty boring, but honestly, I was tired of seeing ugly concrete boxes everywhere. I wanted to prove that you could build things that actually belonged in their environment. My architecture professor, Dr. Martinez, suggested I check out Stone Gate Gorge in North Carolina. He said the rock formations there looked almost man-made, but they were completely natural, perfect for my research. The drive up to Stone Gate Gorge took about 3 hours from Charlotte. I packed my car with all kinds of surveying equipment, cameras, and geological testing tools. I'm not going to lie, I was pretty excited. This was exactly the kind of project that could make my career. The local legends claimed the rocks were arranged by some unknown master builder centuries ago, but I was going to prove they were just natural geological features that happened to look organized. When I first saw the gorge, I'll admit I was shocked. The rock formations didn't just look organized, they looked perfect. There were natural stone arches that seemed to balance impossibly, stairs carved right into the cliff face, and platform formations that looked like someone had designed them with a blueprint. Everything was too neat, too purposeful to be random, but the rocks themselves looked ancient, way older than any modern construction. I set up my equipment on the first day and started measuring angles and calculating structural loads. That's when things got interesting. The formations followed architectural principles perfectly. The weight distribution, the support structures, even the spacing between elements, it all made sense from an engineering perspective. But when I did geological dating tests on some rock samples, they came back showing the stones were thousands of years old. Tuesday morning, the air in the gorge felt different. Thick and heavy, like right before a thunderstorm. But there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I had trouble concentrating on my measurements. My laser measuring tools started acting up, giving me readings that didn't make any sense. The numbers kept changing even when I was measuring the same distance twice. Then the silence hit. I mean, complete silence. No wind through the trees, no birds, no water trickling anywhere. Even my own footsteps seemed muffled. I checked my laptop to make notes about the weird atmosphere, but the battery was completely dead. That was impossible because I'd charged it fully just an hour before. That's when I started noticing the cairns. Small piles of stacked stones scattered throughout the formations, but they weren't random. Each one was perfectly integrated with the larger rock architecture, like they were part of the original design. On top of each cairn were what looked like building tools, primitive chisels, measuring ropes made of some kind of plant fiber, and stone hammers that looked worn smooth from use. The smell hit me next. It was like fresh concrete mixed with something ancient and organic, earthy but also chemical. I'd never smelled anything like it before, and honestly, it made my stomach turn a little bit. I was taking photos of one of the cairns when I saw the first red cloth strip. It was tied around a specific point on one of the rock arches, marking what looked like a stress point in the structure. Then I saw another one, and another. There were dozens of them, all marking critical architectural elements. Someone, or something, was studying these formations just like I was. Around noon, I heard construction sounds, chiseling, the scrape of heavy stones being moved, ropes creaking under weight. But I couldn't see any workers anywhere. The sounds were coming, G from all around me, like there was a whole construction crew working on the formations, but they were invisible. That's when I saw the rocks moving by themselves. Not dramatically, just small adjustments. A stone here would shift slightly to the left, another would settle a few inches lower, but they moved with purpose, like they were being guided by invisible hands. The coordination was perfect, like watching a choreographed dance performed by the stones themselves. The first pale figure emerged from within the rock wall around 2 p.m. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me at first. It looked almost human, but the skin had the texture of weathered granite, gray and rough and slightly reflective, like it had been carved instead of grown. The clothes looked carved too, simple work clothes that seemed to be part of the body rather than worn over it. More figures started appearing from different parts of the rock formations. Their faces were only partially formed, like sculptures that someone had started but never finished. They moved slowly and deliberately, carrying tools that looked identical to the ones I'd found on the cairns. These stone builders continued working on the formations, adding new elements, adjusting existing ones. They'd been at this for a very long time. I realized I was watching something that had been going on for thousands of years. These weren't people anymore, if they ever had been. They were part of the architecture itself, eternal builders working on a project that would never be finished. One of them noticed me studying their work. It approached slowly, and when it touched my hand, I saw images flash through my mind. Architectural plans for impossible structures. Cities that grew like living plants. Bridges made of rock that could bend and flex like trees in the wind. Buildings that breathed with the seasons and aged like mountains instead of crumbling like human constructions. The knowledge was incredible. These builders understood something about construction that modern architects had completely lost. They knew how to work with natural forces instead of fighting them, how to make buildings that were alive instead of dead. But as more of them gathered around me, touching my arms and hands, I realized what accepting this knowledge meant. My hands started feeling cold and rough. When I looked down, my fingers were turning gray, taking on that same granite texture. They wanted to teach me, to make me part of their eternal project. But becoming like them meant giving up everything human about myself. I thought about my childhood home, with its crooked porch and uneven floors. My college dorm room with its peeling paint and broken air conditioner. Ugly buildings, imperfect buildings, but full of human life and memories. The stone builders couldn't understand that. They only saw flaws to be corrected, chaos to be organized. That's when I got desperate. I grabbed my surveying equipment and started creating deliberate measurement errors. I built unstable, asymmetrical cairns that violated every architectural principle I'd ever learned. The stone builders became agitated, distressed by the imperfect structures. They couldn't focus on me while trying to comprehend buildings that were intentionally wrong. I destroyed all my precise measurements and photos, embracing architectural chaos. While they were trying to fix my deliberately flawed constructions, I climbed out of the gorge. My hands still felt rough and cold, but I was still human enough to drive away. I changed my thesis completely after that. Instead of focusing on perfect structures that worked with nature, I wrote about emotionally meaningful architecture. Buildings that serve people instead of pursuing some impossible ideal of perfection. I became an architect, but I designed buildings that feel like home, not monuments. My buildings are imperfect, but the people who live and work in them love them. They have character and warmth and all the beautiful flaws that make spaces feel human. Sometimes, when I'm working with stone, my hands still feel cold and rough. But instead of fighting that sensation, I use it to remind myself why I build, not for perfection, but for people. The stone builders are still out there, still working on their eternal project. But I chose humanity and all its beautiful imperfections instead. I've never been back to Stonegate Gorge, and I never will. Some knowledge isn't worth the price they ask for it. I was 25 when I took the repo job, mostly because I needed steady work and honestly didn't care much about making friends. My girlfriend had just left me, said I was too distant, too cold, and maybe she was right. But repo work suited me fine. You drive around, find cars people can't pay for anymore, hook them up, and drive away. Simple, clean, no complicated relationships. I'd been doing it for about 8 months when my boss Danny handed me what he called the big one. Some guy named Rodriguez had stopped making payments on an $80,000 pickup truck 3 months back. Just vanished. The police figured he'd skipped state to avoid the debt, which happens more than you'd think. People get in over their heads, panic, and run. The truck had one of those GPS trackers, and the last ping came from somewhere near Boneyard Gorge, up in the mountains about 2 hours east of Asheville. After that, nothing. Signal just died. Danny figured maybe Rodriguez ditched it there before he took off, maybe tried to make it look stolen. Either way, we had the legal paperwork, and that truck was worth more than I made in 6 months. I loaded up my tow truck that Friday morning with all the gear, chains, winch cables, paperwork, the works. The drive up was pretty normal, just winding mountain roads getting narrower and steeper. I'd never heard of Boneyard Gorge before, but when I plugged the GPS coordinates into my phone, it led me to this old logging road that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The road ended at what I guess you'd call a clearing, but really it was just where the trees stopped and the ground dropped away. Boneyard Gorge was this massive crack in the mountain, maybe 70 feet deep and twice as wide. And man, it was full of junk. Old cars, truck parts, appliances, metal debris, like people had been dumping stuff there for decades. Made sense, I guess. Remote location, and nobody around to stop you. I could see the pickup truck from up top sitting at the bottom like a white dot among all that rusted metal. Getting down there was going to be the tricky part. There was a steep trail, more like a goat path really, that zigzagged down the side. I'd have to winch the truck up if I found it. The climb down took about 20 minutes, and by the time I reached the bottom, I was sweating pretty good. But when I got to the pickup, I stopped cold. This wasn't some abandoned vehicle. This thing had been stripped, completely. Only the frame was left, sitting on blocks where the wheels used to be. Every single part that could be removed was gone. Engine, transmission, doors, seats, even the wiring harness. It looked like a skeleton. But here's what got me. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. The cuts were clean, professional. No hack job with a crowbar. This was precision work, like a chop shop operation. Except who runs a chop shop at the bottom of a gorge in the middle of nowhere? I walked around taking pictures for the insurance claim, trying to figure out what happened. That's when I started noticing other things. There were these little piles of stones scattered around the stripped truck, maybe a dozen of them. Cairns, I think they're called. And each one had a car part balanced on top. An alternator here, a brake pad there, a steering wheel. Some of the parts looked old, like they'd been sitting out in the weather for years. Around 2 p.m., the air started getting thick. That's the only way I can describe it. Like breathing through a wet towel. And there was this smell. Motor oil mixed with rust. But underneath something else. Something organic and sweet. Like meat going bad. That's when I realized how quiet it was. No birds, no insects, no wind through the trees. Just this heavy silence pressing down on everything. Even my own steps seemed muffled. My tow truck's engine had been running fine all morning, but now it started making this grinding noise, like the transmission was slipping. The RPMs dropped, and when I tried to rev it, nothing happened, just that grinding sound getting louder. I popped the hood to take a look, and that's when I saw them. More cairns appearing around my truck. I swear they hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. And the car parts on top weren't random junk. They were good parts. A chrome alternator that looked almost new. Brake pads still in their packaging. A steering wheel with the airbag still attached. The smell was getting stronger. That mix of oil and decay. And now I could hear something else. Mechanical sounds echoing off the gorge walls. Grinding. Cutting. The whine of power tools. But there was nobody else down there. Nobody I could see anyway. Red cloth started appearing, tied between the car parts like some kind of weird assembly line. Long strips of fabric connecting one pile to another, crisscrossing the gorge floor. And from somewhere up in the rocks, I heard voices. More parts, they called. Need more parts. The voices sounded wrong, too flat, too mechanical, like they were coming through a radio with bad reception. I grabbed my phone to call Danny, but no signal. Not even emergency service. That's when they started coming out. At first I thought they were just people, maybe some kind of salvage crew working illegally. But as they got closer, I could see they were wrong. All wrong. Their skin had this metallic sheen, like it was made of brushed aluminum. And their hands, Jesus, their hands weren't hands anymore. They were tools. Wrenches for fingers. Screwdrivers where thumbs should be. They wore coveralls, but the fabric looked like it had grown into their skin, becoming part of them. Tool belts hung from their waists, but the tools were attached, fused to their bodies like extra limbs. When they walked, they moved with this mechanical precision, each step exactly the same length, same timing. They surrounded my truck, examining it with professional interest, running their tool hands over the engine, checking the frame, testing the suspension. One of them, the one closest to me, looked up and spoke. "Good condition," he said in that flat radio voice. "Valuable parts. Minimal wear on transmission." Another one was looking at me the same way they'd looked at the truck. "Muscle tissue excellent," he said to the others. "Bone frame structurally sound." That's when I understood. They didn't see a difference between me and my truck. We were both just machines to be stripped for parts. They started moving toward me, raising cutting torches and power tools that grew from their arms like mechanical extensions. I backed against the gorge wall, mind racing. These things, whatever they were, they thought like mechanics. They saw everything in terms of parts and function. My truck had an anti-theft system, one of those aftermarket jobs that makes a lot of noise and flashing lights when triggered. I fumbled for the remote on my keychain and hit the panic button. Immediately, the truck exploded in sound, horn blaring, lights flashing, that piercing electronic alarm echoing off the gorge walls. The mechanical things stopped, confused. They tried to approach the truck, but every time they got close, the alarm would get louder, the lights brighter. Their tool hands weren't designed for modern electronics. They kept trying to disable the alarm system, but they couldn't figure out the computerized components. While they were distracted, I ran to my emergency gear and grabbed the gas can I kept for long jobs. I dumped gasoline over the nearest pile of car parts, then the next one, working my way around the gorge floor while the alarm kept the things occupied. When I lit the emergency flare and dropped it, the whole place went up. Car parts exploded as old gas tanks ignited. Metal flew through the air like shrapnel. The mechanical things screamed. Not human screams, but the sound of metal grinding against metal, machinery tearing itself apart. Without their collection of car parts, they seemed to lose focus, lose purpose. They started falling apart, their tool hands disconnecting, their metallic skin flaking away like rust. Within minutes, there was nothing left but scattered debris and the echo of explosions fading into the mountains. My truck was damaged. Something they'd done to the engine made it run rough, but it still moved. I drove up that goat path faster than I should have, not caring if I scraped the undercarriage or blew a tire. I just needed to get out of there. When I got back to town, I told Danny I'd found environmental contamination, old cars leaking fluids into the watershed. He filed a report with the EPA, and a few weeks later they sent a cleanup crew to remove all the automotive debris from the gorge. I never went back to see what they found. I quit the repo job that same month. Couldn't handle being around stripped cars or abandoned vehicles anymore. Took a job as an insurance investigator instead, helping people file claims, trying to help folks instead of taking their stuff away. But I still have nightmares. Dreams where I'm lying on a garage floor, conscious and aware, while mechanical hands discuss the condition of my parts. Sometimes I wake up hearing those flat voices appraising my body like it's a used car, checking my joints for wear, testing my reflexes, discussing my resale value. I moved to Charlotte after that, somewhere I could use public transportation and didn't need to drive much. Became an advocate for people facing repossession, helping them understand their rights, teaching them about predatory lending practices. I never work on my own car anymore. Too afraid of what I might find under the hood. And every night before bed, I check my truck's anti-theft system, making sure the batteries are good, the remote works, the alarm will sound if I need it. Because looking back now, I know those things are still out, there somewhere, building new collections from stolen cars, turning salvage yards and chop shops into hunting grounds, waiting for the next person who sees the difference between man and machine. I still don't. I was 23 when I was working every delivery app you could think of, just to keep my head above water. DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub. Honestly, if they had an app and paid drivers, I was signed up. My mom had gotten really sick that spring, and between her medical bills and just trying to survive, I was pulling 12-hour shifts almost every night. Not exactly the life I'd planned after college, but sometimes life doesn't ask what you want. I'd been doing the delivery thing for about 8 months when this order came through that changed everything. Looking back now, I should have known something was off right from the start. But when you're desperate for money, you tend to ignore the red flags. It was a Thursday night, around 10:30 p.m., and I was getting ready to call it quits when this massive order popped up on my phone. The weird thing wasn't just the size of it, though ordering $300 worth of specialty meat at nearly 11 at night was definitely strange. It was what they were ordering. Raw beef, lamb, pork, but not normal cuts. This person wanted organ meat, blood pudding, marrow bones, kidneys, liver, stuff you'd have to go to a real butcher for, not just pick up at the grocery store. The order was from this specialty place called Henderson's Butcher Shop that I'd never heard of, but honestly, I didn't care. The customer had added a $200 tip on top of the delivery fee for one run. I'd never seen anything like it. The delivery address was way out past Hungry Gap Gorge, which I'd heard of but never been to. My GPS said it was about 45 minutes from the butcher shop up in the mountains on some back road I'd never taken. The customer had left specific instructions too, said to call when I got close because the driveway was hard to find, and to make sure I brought everything to the front door personally. He'd paid in advance, so all I had to do was pick up the meat and drive it out there. Henderson's Butcher Shop was this little place tucked between a pawn shop and a laundromat. The owner, this older guy with blood under his fingernails, seemed nervous when I told him about the order. He kept asking if I was sure about the address, if I'd been out there before. When I said no, he just shook his head and muttered something about people not knowing what they're getting into. But he packed everything up in these heavy cooler bags and sent me on my way. The drive started normal enough. I followed the GPS through town and out onto Highway 47, then onto smaller and smaller roads until I was on this narrow mountain road that barely had room for 2 cars. My phone signal got weaker and weaker as I climbed higher, but the GPS kept working, so I figured I was fine. The headlights cut through the darkness, and I could see the trees getting thicker on both sides. It was when I reached the turnoff for Hungry Gap Road that things started feeling wrong. The air changed first, got thicker somehow, like right before a storm, except there weren't any clouds. My ears popped like I was gaining altitude fast, even though the road was pretty level. And it got quiet. Really quiet. I realized I hadn't seen any other cars for the last 20 minutes, which wasn't that weird for a back road, but there weren't any sounds either. No crickets, no owls, nothing. The GPS led me down this winding dirt road for about 10 more minutes until I saw lights ahead. The cabin was smaller than I'd expected, just a basic log structure with a covered porch and windows glowing yellow. But what made me slow down was what I could see behind it. This massive dark gap in the ground. Hungry Gap Gorge. I'd heard it was deep, but seeing it in person was something else. It had to be 50 feet across, and from what I could tell in the darkness, it dropped straight down, into nothing. I parked near the front steps and grabbed the cooler bags from my back seat. They were heavier than I'd expected, and the smell coming from them was making my stomach turn. Raw. Meat has a smell anyway, but this was different. Metallic and sweet at the same time. I was trying not to breathe through my nose when the front door opened. The guy who came out was tall and thin, probably in his 40s, with pale skin that looked like he didn't get outside much. He was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, nothing weird about his clothes, but something about the way he moved seemed off. Too careful, like he was thinking about every step. And when he looked at me, I got this uncomfortable feeling that he wasn't really seeing me as a person, more like he was studying me. "You Jessica?" he asked, and his voice sounded normal enough. I nodded and held up the bags. Got your order here. That'll be... Well, you already paid online, so you're all set. He took the bags from me, and I noticed his hands were cold. Really cold, like he'd been holding ice. Appreciate you coming all the way out here, he said. Not many drivers want to make the trip. I was backing toward my car when he called out again. Hey, your car making any weird noises? Engine sounded rough when you pulled up. I stopped and listened. My car was still running, but now that he mentioned it, there was something off about the sound. Instead of the normal idle, it was making this wet, gurgling noise like it was flooded or something. I'd never heard it do that before. That's strange, I said, more to myself than to him. I walked back to the driver's side and popped the hood, even though I didn't know much about engines. When I looked under there with my phone's flashlight, everything looked normal, but the gurgling sound was getting worse. Why don't you come inside for a minute, the guy said from behind me. Let it cool down. These mountain roads can be hard on cars that aren't used to them. I should have said no. Should have tried to start the car anyway and dealt with whatever was wrong once I got back to town. But it was almost midnight. I was 45 minutes from civilization, and my phone had no signal. If the car really was broken, I was going to need help. That's when I noticed the smell. While I'd been focused on the car, the air had gotten thick with this rotting meat stench, like when you forget chicken in the fridge for too long. But worse. Much worse. It was so strong I had to cover my nose with my shirt. What is that smell? I asked. The guy, I realized he'd never told me his name, just shrugged. Probably something dead down in the gorge. Animals fall in sometimes. Nothing you can do about it. I looked toward the gorge, and that's when I saw them. Lights. Not electric lights, but flickering orange ones like campfires or torches moving around at the bottom. I could barely make them out, but they were definitely there, and they were moving. Are there people down there? I asked. He followed my gaze and was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes, he said finally. Come on inside. Your car will be fine. Every instinct I had was telling me to get out of there, but when I tried to start the car, it made that horrible gurgling sound and nothing else. The engine wouldn't turn over at all. I was stuck. The inside of the cabin was worse than the outside. It looked normal at first glance. Basic furniture, a kitchen, a living room with a couch and TV. But there were too many knives, not just kitchen knives, but butcher knives, cleavers, things I'd never seen before. They were hanging on hooks all over the walls, and most of them looked used, really used. You want some coffee? He asked, walking toward the kitchen. Might be a while before your car starts up again. I stayed near the door. I'm fine, thanks. I should probably call someone about the car. No signal up here, he said without looking back. Won't get any until you're halfway back to town. He opened the refrigerator and I caught a glimpse inside. It was full of meat, but not the kind you'd buy at a store. These were cuts I'd never seen before, wrapped in white, paper with labels written in black marker. The writing was too small to read from where I was standing, but something about the shapes looked wrong. That's when I heard the voices. They were coming from outside, down in the gorge. Multiple voices, but I couldn't make out words. They sounded hungry, if that makes sense. Like begging, but angry at the same time. And they were getting louder. What's that? I asked. The guy froze with his back to me. What's what? Those voices, down in the gorge. He slowly turned around and I saw that his skin had changed. It was grayer now, with dark veins showing through like on old meat. His eyes looked different too, yellower, with pupils that were too big. You shouldn't have come here, he said, and his voice sounded different now, rougher. But since you did, might as well make the best of it. That's when I saw the cleaver in his hand. I ran for the door, but it wouldn't open. The handle turned, but something was holding it shut from the outside. I could hear footsteps coming from the back of the cabin, more than one person. The voices from the gorge were getting louder too, more urgent. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, the guy said behind me. His footsteps were slow, deliberate. The thing down there is hungry, has been for weeks. We've been keeping it fed, but it wants something fresh. I turned around and saw there were 3 more people with him now. 2 women and another man, all with that same gray, mottled skin and yellow eyes. They were all carrying knives or cleavers, and they were all looking at me like I was dinner. "You'll taste so much better than the delivery," the first guy said. The voices from the gorge were getting frantic now. I could make out words. Hungry. So hungry. Need fresh meat. And underneath those voices, something else. Something big moving around down there, making sounds too. Hat weren't quite human and weren't quite animal. I grabbed a meat hook from the kitchen counter and swung it at the closest woman. She moved slower than I expected, like her muscles weren't working right, and I caught her in the shoulder. She screamed, but no blood came out, just this black, thick liquid that smelled like rotten eggs. The others backed away, but they were still between me and the door. That's when I noticed the windows. They didn't have screens, and one of them was open. It faced the gorge, but it was my only chance. I feinted toward the door, then dove for the window. Behind me, I could hear them scrambling to catch me, but they were too slow. I hit the ground outside and rolled, the meat hook still in my hand. The smell outside was overwhelming now, like a slaughterhouse that had been left in the sun for days. And the voices from the gorge were so loud, they seemed to be coming from right next to me. But I could see something now. Stone cairns all around the cabin, each one topped with bones. Human bones, from the look of them. Fresh ones with meat still attached, teeth marks showing where they'd been gnawed clean. Red cloth strips were tied to trees leading from the cabin down toward the gorge, like a path. And following that path, I could see more of those pale figures moving around in the darkness. A whole family of them, all carrying meat down into that black hole. Something roared from the bottom of the gorge, something massive. The sound was like a human scream mixed with the kind of hunger that comes from not eating for weeks. It shook the ground under my feet and made my teeth hurt. The people, or whatever they were, started coming out of the cabin after me, but they were moving frantically now, stumbling and calling out, feed it, or it will eat us instead." I realized they weren't the ones in control. They were just as trapped, as I was, slaves to whatever was down in that gorge. It had changed them, made them into something that could hunt and kill, but they were still prisoners. I saw a jerry can of gasoline near the cabin's sidewall, probably for a generator. Without thinking, I grabbed it and started pouring it around the foundation of the building. The pale figures were trying to stop me, but they kept looking back at the gorge, terrified of what would happen if they left their post too long. When I lit the gasoline with my cigarette lighter, the whole cabin went up fast. The screams from inside were horrible, but they wouldn't leave. Even with the building burning around them, they were too afraid of the thing in the gorge to run. That's when I remembered the delivery. All that raw meat was still in the cabin, probably burning up. I grabbed the cooler bags I'd dropped and threw everything I could down into the gorge. The roaring got quieter for a moment, like whatever was down there was busy eating. I ran to my car, and for the first time in an hour it started normally, like there had never been anything wrong with it. I drove away as fast as I could, but I could still hear those inhuman roars echoing from the gorge behind me. I told the police I'd found what looked like a drug lab explosion when I got back to town. Figured that was easier to explain than the truth. They sent someone out to investigate, but they said they couldn't find any remains of a cabin or any evidence of what I'd described. Just a deep gorge and some scorched trees. I quit doing deliveries that week. Couldn't handle the idea of bringing food to strangers' houses, not knowing what they might really be ordering it for. Got a day job doing security at an office building instead. Nothing involving food or hunger or driving to people's houses in the middle of nowhere. It's been 2 years now, and I still have nightmares about being butchered and served to something massive and hungry. I went vegetarian after that night. Can't stand the sight or smell of raw meat. Sometimes when I'm at restaurants, I catch myself checking the kitchen, looking for signs that might tell me what they're really serving. I never drive on remote roads at night anymore, and I try to warn other delivery drivers about the signs to watch for. Orders that seem too good to be true. Customers who won't give clear directions. Places where your phone loses signal. Most of them think I'm paranoid, but a few listen. I moved away from that area completely, but sometimes I still check the news from there. Looking for missing person reports, unexplained disappearances, anything that might mean what I found is still out there. Because honestly, I know it is. That fire might have gotten the people who were feeding it, But something that big, that hungry, doesn't just die. It finds new servants. I still check my rearview mirror more than I should, especially at night. And I never ever work anywhere that involves bringing food to hungry things in the dark.